Thanks for choosing to join me here this morning. I know there's plenty of other attractions on offer here at BVE, so thank you for coming and giving me maybe half an hour of your life. Thanks also to BVE for inviting me to come and speak with you this morning. My topic, as I've presented it, is how we deliver a trusted viewing currency in the internet era. Just by way of background, a quick summary of why BARB exists. Some of you may well know this. Each year, advertisers and broadcasters invest collectively over £7.5 billion in the production and distribution of television programs and commercials, and the audience figures that we produce are a very important input to the assessment of the effectiveness of that investment, whether it be audiences for programs or the number of people who've seen advertising commercials. And everything we do is underpinned by what we call joint industry currency principles. We're governed by the organisations you see on this chart, which represent the breadth of the UK television and advertising industry. And they oversee our work. We're independent, we're objective, all our data are transparent, and we're accountable in the way that we deliver audience numbers to the industry. And these principles are very important in the modern era. About 18 months ago, there was a publication which I've shown on the bottom left of this slide, which was published jointly by the IPA, which represents advertising agencies, and ISBA, which represents advertisers, and they called it a matter of fact, and it was a call to action for trusted, accountable audience data. And the catalyst for this has been a string of measurement mishaps, as they've been called, by the big online players like Facebook and Google, who don't show the same levels of independence and transparency when it comes to producing audience numbers. So that's just a quick summary of why BARB exists. And our day job is producing audience ratings. And we've been doing it for the best part of 40 years. And currently, on top of the day job, we have three big development priorities. Firstly, there's the rise of online delivery. There are many new what we call broadcaster VOD services, BVOD services, that are delivered via apps. This is BBC iPlayer, ITV Hub, All 4, Sky Go. And these are watched on devices other than the TV set, so it's very important that we can deliver multiple screen audience ratings. And this will be the centerpiece of my slides in the next 15 to 20 minutes before I open up for questions. Another huge priority for us is dealing with the rise of what we call unidentified viewing. We know the TV set's on, but people are doing something other than watching a channel that has chosen to be reported by BARB. And I'll come back to this at the end of my presentation. It's a big trend, and it's one that we have to deal with. And our third big development priority is dealing with new commercial formats. These are sometimes called dynamically inserted advertising or addressable advertising. BARB has been reporting Sky AdSmart, which is a forerunner in this space, for over 5 years, coming on 6 years, and we're continuing to work with broadcasters and platforms as they deliver new forms of addressable advertising. I'm not talking about this in depth today, but I'm happy to take questions if that's your particular area of interest. Now, each of these priorities comes about because of the facility to distribute content through the internet, and much has been written about the impact that the internet will have on television. The earliest comment I can find on this was from Marshall McLuhan, who back in 1962 wrote a book called the Gutenberg Galaxy, and this book is widely credited with being the first predictions of the internet. And Marshall McLuhan referred to the internet as the extension of consciousness. He didn't have that phrase internet at that time. And amongst his many writings which have been quoted in communication theory for many, many decades, he talked about the extension of consciousness, including television as its content, not as its environment, and that it will transform television into an art form. So this is by my reckoning, the earliest prediction of the golden age of the TV is currently in. Here's a more recent prediction from Tim Cook, the chief exec of Apple. Back in 2015, he predicted that the future of television is apps. And if you look at a screen grab from my iPad today, this seems to vindicate that prediction. There are many television services here that I can watch on my iPad, not all of them produced by broadcasters. But actually, if we go back 5 years, this is a screen grab from my iPad back in 2013. It's a slightly more grainy image, the digital equivalent of a multiply photocopied piece of paper. But nevertheless, you can still see 5 years ago there were apps that I was watching television on. So is Tim Cook jumping on a bandwagon, or did he have a different point? And I think his point was related to what my TV set at home now looks like. And this is my TV set. Through Apple TV, I've got many of those same apps that I can watch on the iPad. And I think Tim Cook's point was really that the TV set is the dominant screen. And I think he was making the point that the future of television on the TV screen is app-based. And indeed, whether it's through Apple TV or one of the many other devices that you can now attach to your TV set, these kind of apps are being used increasingly by viewers to watch their favorite programs. And to reinforce the point that the TV set is dominant, I've got some statistics here for viewing to BBC iPlayer. If you go back to July 2017, we can see that just under half of all viewing to BBC iPlayer was on the TV set. That's the 47.4% number back in July 2017. Coming right up to the present, on the right of the screen, you can see that last month, over 60%, 63.5% of viewing to the iPlayer was on the TV set. All of the top line growth for iPlayer is coming on the TV set. That's not to say other devices aren't important. If we put together the viewing, not just to BBC iPlayer, but to other BVOD services such as ITV Hub, All4, etc., here we can see week by week the total amount of time spent viewing on tablets, PCs, and smartphones. Each week it's about 1 to 1.5 billion minutes, which sounds like a very big number, and it's a number that there are peaks that coincide with momentous events like elections, World Cup, Love Island. Come back to that in a moment. But actually we know that people spend 90 to 95 billion minutes watching on a TV set. So these devices are only adding about 1.5% to total TV viewing time. And we also know that viewing on these other devices is an evening activity. So this shows viewing by time of day. And there is some evidence of increased viewing at commuting times, but you can see that the biggest amount of viewing on tablets, PCs and smartphones is in the evening, which is traditionally when people are watching on the TV set. So the point with these last few charts is to say it's great that people now have the flexibility to watch on other devices, but these other devices are only getting a toehold in an ecosystem that is still dominated by the TV set. Now the data I've shared with you comes from a new data source that BARB has had for a few years now. It's a census count of viewing on devices. And we have this data because the broadcasters cooperate with us, and it means that whenever anybody in the country, including you, watch any of these services, we know which programs are being watched, how long they're being watched for, and which device they're being watched on. From a researcher's perspective, it's panacea because it's a census count. There's no sampling error. But equally, the data set doesn't tell us who's in front of the screen, how many people, and what type of people they are. And for that, we continue to rely on a representative panel. And we've had a representative panel in place for many, many years. And this is important so we know who's actually watching, what they're watching, and which device they're watching on. And it's the combination of these two data sources that allows us to deliver very rich insight into what's being watched on which device and by whom. We've called this Project Dovetail, putting these two different data sets together. And last autumn, we, for the first time, published multiple screen program ratings. That effectively takes the census count, which gives you device ratings, and with the richness of the people data from our panel, creates people ratings. Let me give you some examples of what you can now see. So here are some drama examples. Bodyguard, I'm sure you know, was a huge hit for the BBC last year. The final episode got a TV set audience of 14.3 million and 865,000 watched on other devices. So the other devices in this case increased the audience by 6.5%, which is very significant. EastEnders regularly gets an uplift of over 5% from other devices. Programs like Catastrophe on Cold Feet get a much bigger percentage uplift, in this case nearly 8%. Although in absolute terms that's not as big as dramas such as Cold Feet, which got over 100,000. So that gives you starts to give you a picture of how different programs get different uplifts from other devices. If we turn to entertainment and go to the bottom line here, it goes back to the story of Love Island, and this is the show that breaks all records when it comes to viewing on devices other than the TV set. This episode, which was broadcast on July the 15th, you can see that nearly 1 million people watched it on other devices, and that's an uplift of nearly 1/4 on the people who watched on TV sets. And that overshadows, to some extent, the audiences that watched on other devices for the finals of Bake Off, Strictly and I'm a Celebrity, although those devices did pretty well because they all generated audiences in the hundreds of thousands on other devices. Final example from sport. Here are 3 Premier League matches shown on Sky Sports. In each case you can see that viewing on other devices is adding about 6 to 7%. I should say though that's a bit of an understatement, and the reason it's an understatement is our TV set viewing numbers include viewing through Now TV. We're currently working with Sky to get Now TV viewing figures for other devices. So the other devices figure for Sky is understated at the moment. So when we include that, I'm sure there'll be an even bigger uplift. So that gives you a sense at a headline level of some of the information we can now get into viewing on other devices. Now all of these numbers are what we call consolidated 7-day viewing. That means it includes viewing live at the point of broadcast and in the 7 days post-broadcast. One of the big phenomena in viewing at the moment is people watching shows before their broadcast. And the example I've got here is from Sky. It's a drama series from last year called Save Me. There were 6 episodes which were all made available on demand on the day that episode 1 was shown as part of the Sky Atlantic schedule. So you can see the bit that's interesting here is the gold bit, which is pre-broadcast viewing, people watching the episodes through on demand, and this is just TV set data, watching it on demand before it's shown as part of a linear schedule. And we can report that because Sky provide us with all the assets to all the episodes in advance of episode 1. So we can measure from our panel who's viewing episodes 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. Now if we hadn't had that cooperation from Sky, all that yellow bit would have been unidentified, and the mood at the post broadcast review of the series would have been a lot more somber than I'm sure it was when they looked at these numbers, because all that yellow data would have been not available to see. So clearly Sky thought this was a great success. They've commissioned a second series, and this is another example of how BARB can help you understand the audiences that are taking place at the moment. If we put together all our techniques, we can give you what we call the anatomy of a program audience. So this is another example from last year, Killing Eve. I'm sure quite a few of you enjoyed Killing Eve. This is episode 6. Again, like Save Me, all episodes were made available on the day that episode 1 was part of the linear schedule. So for episode 6, first of all, we can look at when people watched, and you can see that over 5 million people watched this episode before it was broadcast on BBC One. Just under 2 million watched it live, and then a further 2.8 million watched it in the 4 weeks after it was broadcast. So over half of people were watching it before it was broadcast. We can then add colour to that by saying, well, which device did they watch on? So for the people who watched before, the lion's share is on the TV set, but there's still 1 in 6 who watched it pre-broadcast on either a smartphone, a PC or a tablet. Not surprisingly, live viewing is dominated by the TV set. There is a very thin sliver watching on other devices. And then post-broadcast, the other devices come back into play, although again the TV set is dominant. All in all, we can see that for this episode, a total of 9.86 million people watched it from the moment it was available on iPlayer through to 4 weeks after it had been broadcast on BBC One. The TV set audience was 8.8 million, so the other devices were adding nearly 12% to the TV set audience. And this chart best encapsulates all the different ways we can now measure viewing and help you as program makers, or if there are advertisers or in the audience, you understand how people see your commercials or your programs. So that's what we can now do. Let me go back to one of our other priorities, which I talked about at the beginning, which is the rise of unidentified viewing. And this chart demonstrates the scale of this issue. So if you look at all individuals on the left, last year, on average, they spend 48 minutes a day watching something on their TV set which wasn't a BARB reported channel. It's even more of a phenomenon for kids who spent over an hour a day watching something other than a BARB reported channel, and for 16 to 34-year-olds, it's 71 minutes a day. And you don't have to be a statistician to understand the significance of that growth trend. What's in here? So we know gaming is in here. We know that watching some box sets is in here. Broadcasters who make box sets available can have those measured by us in the same way that we measured Save Me pre-broadcast. And increasingly broadcasters are giving us their box sets so that we can take them out of unidentified viewing and attribute them back to the broadcaster. But clearly, and probably the most significant driver of this, is Netflix, Amazon, and YouTube. We know from our research that there is significant growth in people taking up subscriptions to SVOD services, as we call them, so Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Now TV, we classify as SVOD. In the last quarter of 2018, Netflix went through the 10 million barrier for the first time, according to our research. Amazon Prime went through 5 million for the first time. And you can see the year-on-year growth is in excess of 20% for both of those services. So this is highly significant. And we would love to be able to measure these services. But given our current techniques available to us, we really need them to cooperate with us. And they choose not to at the moment. This might change. And so for us, it can be a little bit frustrating that we don't have their cooperation because we can't illuminate this black hole that there's a phrase some people use to refer to unidentified viewing. That said, we're encouraged by new technologies that are coming through from the research agencies that we can work with. So these two slides come from presentations, one given by Kantar Media, which is our current research contractor. The other comes from Nielsen, and I'm sure many of you are aware Nielsen does the program ratings in the US. And both of these charts are based on a new metering technology, which rather than being attached to a TV set in a panel home, is attached to the broadband router. And the meter allows you to track streaming activity. Now clearly we have to make sure to the panel members' satisfaction that we're only tracking internet activity that's of relevance to us. But we're very encouraged by these new metering technologies. We're testing them both at the moment. And amongst other things, they offer us the opportunity to deliver an aggregate level of viewing to services such as Netflix, Amazon, and YouTube, even if those services don't want to be measured by BARB. So that just about wraps up the slides I've prepared for this morning. It's, I think, quite exciting times for BARB. We've delivered new ratings data in the last year, which cover all 4 screens. We're testing new techniques which will help us meet these priorities. Ever since we launched back in 1981, we've been continuously developing our services to keep track with all the latest trends in how television is distributed and how viewers choose to watch. And I've been able to give you a glimpse today of the new data we're producing and how we're planning to solve some of the problems we don't have solutions for yet. So with that, thank you for listening. I think we have time for questions, about 10 minutes, so I'm happy to take any questions you've got. There's a microphone coming. Thank you.
What is the definition of unidentified watching in your mind or in your perspective?
So the technical definition is that our metering technology knows when a TV set is on, and if that's 100% of TV set on time, we can then work out what part of that is spent watching BARB reported channels with a great degree of certainty. So that, if you like, is identified viewing, BARB reported channels. So the remainder by default is unidentified viewing. We know something's happening, but we can't be precise in saying, was it Netflix, was it gaming? So our definition is, we know the TV set's on, but we can't identify the actual content.
I would like to give an example and talk about this example, over this example. By example, I don't have a TV in my home, but I watch, not a cable network or somewhere pay TV or IPTV solutions, but I have a TV, but I use the TV just for sending some data or videos around over my computer to my TV to watch it on a much more bigger screen. Is this also included to the unidentified?
So if you were, say you were watching BBC iPlayer and casting that onto the TV set, that would be identified viewing, because we would be able to recognise that it's BBC content.
Whoa.
But if you were casting Netflix onto the TV set, we would have to put that as unidentified viewing, because we can't yet identify that it's Netflix content.
Can you measure this? It's not shown on PC, it's shown on TV. How can you identify it?
We have a meter on the TV set which takes audio signatures of what is being watched on the TV set. So if the audio is coming out of the TV set, we regard it as TV set viewing.
Okay, thank you.
So the broadcasters we're talking here about, they are like giants. I myself deal with smaller channels, mostly upcoming ones. What would be your advice for the ones that are willing to make a broadcasting? Because they are sort of now in a gray area, like they don't know what they're doing. Like, should I go YouTube? Should I go anywhere? There's no really specific way for them to measure which one is working for them. What would be your advice for those kind of channels?
Well, we can provide measurement for them. If they are distributing content through YouTube and they work with BARB, we could measure that if that's being watched on the TV set. So to take an example, last May, BT to make the Champions League final available through its YouTube channel. All that viewing to BT Sport for the Champions League was included in our numbers. Now, what BT aren't able to do is to say precisely how many people viewed. We keep them close to it because we know which device was feeding the content to the screen. So we know whether it was a Sky box or a UView box, or if it was another kind of box. And the likelihood, if it was another kind of box and they're watching YouTube, we can get them close to that. So we can provide, if they work with us, some level of indication of to what extent people are watching on different devices through the TV. If they want to work with us also in terms of their apps on other devices, then again we can provide them with numbers. In terms of advising them on their business strategy, that's not our remit. So we provide the numbers and we leave it to the wit and the wisdom of the broadcaster, their own decisions on what those numbers. And I hope that answers your question. For any more? Going.
Do you also work for outside UK with international TV broadcasters?
So our responsibility is measuring audiences that are within the UK, but we work with many international broadcasters who broadcast here. So Discovery, Disney, they're all customers of ours. Equally, if they wanted to be Netflix and Amazon and YouTube could choose to be measured by us as well. But we don't measure audiences outside of the UK. There are other organisations like us in other countries. One more over here.
Just with something like with Netflix, you know, the ones you're not measuring, do they? I'm assuming they do their own measurements, but do they not share that with you?
They don't share it with us. I expect, and I'm not 100% sure about this, that the measurement they get is how many server requests are being made for the content, how long those server requests are lasting for. So that is a device-based measure. It won't tell them who's in front of the screen. It won't tell them how many people. They'll know the registered user who's signed in, but there's no guarantee that that registered user is necessarily in front of the screen. So, for example, in my house, my wife will often watch BBC iPlayer when I'm not there, and she's logged in as me because she's not going to log out of my account and then go into her own. So they have some data which gives them a volume measure, but there's some context missing. They don't share it with us. We'd be happy to have a conversation with them about how they might be measured by us in a way that's equitable with all the other broadcasters we measure. The important thing, because we're a joint industry currency, is we need to measure everybody using the same techniques. I think there's one more over there.
Thank you for your sharing. My question is, I think your data will impact on the creators to better understand what's the channel to distribute.
Sorry, impact on the
creators, like the TV producers, and to understand better their audience in which channel to distribute and what time to distribute that content. But do you think that your data will also impact on them what kind of content they will create?
I think that's very much down to the producers, and I think that when producers are thinking about what kind of creative is going to generate the kind of numbers that they want, then that's something that I don't feel very qualified to talk about. We deliver the numbers and people work out how to generate bigger ones. I think that there is an apocryphal story going back to Netflix that Netflix use algorithms to determine the content and the casting of House of Cards. You might have heard that story. I think it's apocryphal. I think it's probably unlikely. I think David Fincher and Kevin Spacey's relationship was probably more important about why Kevin Spacey got cast. I'm not sure to what extent algorithms can really inform the creative process. I think there will always need to be in the creative process an element of gut feel, instinct, keeping an eye on what people are interested in these days. Numbers help reinforce your decisions rather than the other way around, probably.
Okay. And the following question is, because Netflix and also Amazon is new technology companies, in what ways do you think that you will cooperate with them in the future? What is your advantages, advance in your technology? You can convince them.
Well, I think that so currently neither at Netflix or Amazon has an advertising funded model. If they choose to move towards an advertising funded model, I think there will be some pressure brought to bear on them by the likes of advertisers and agencies to have a measure which is equivalent to the measure for other commercially funded channels. So that's one reason why they might choose to work with us in the future. If they change their model, it may be they choose to be measured by us just because they're interested in understanding what proportion of people's viewing they're they're getting and what kind of people are viewing, and those people who are viewing Netflix, what else are they doing on a TV set? If they worked with us, they would get all that insight which they can't get from their own data. I think we're out of time. Thank you very much for giving me half an hour. Thank you very much.